Black watercolor paper, this goes against everything I know about watercolor painting. And I can also see how using this paper without a bit of knowledge may be extremely frustrating. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use black watercolor paper and actually my first impressions of using it as we create a painting together. Hello there everyone, Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and in this video we're going to take a look at painting on black watercolor paper. Now I'll be honest, when I first heard about black watercolor paper I was intrigued, but I was also confused because really it goes against everything that I know about watercolor painting. With traditional watercolor painting, the transparent or translucent watercolor is applied to a light surface, usually white watercolor paper, and the white of the paper affects the values, the light values that we see in the painting. Of course, dark values are easy to achieve with multiple layered applications. Now, what happens if we work on black watercolor paper? How do we create a full range of value? I can understand that there are probably folks out here that went out there and bought black watercolor paper and tried to apply traditional watercolors to the surface and got frustrated because the result is obviously a dark painting. So how can we use black watercolor paper in order to create a watercolor painting? In this video, we're going to cover all of that, and we're also going to create a painting from start to finish on black watercolor paper. But before we get into that, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell. And if you like this video, make sure that you give it a like. And if you want to take your drawing and painting skills to another level, I'd encourage you to check out the membership program over at thevirtualinstructor.com, which includes a variety of drawing and painting courses on a variety of subject matter and media, weekly live lessons, which are broadcast live each week, but also recorded and stored in our vault, weekly critiques as part of the Members Minute, and a year-long curriculum for visual arts teachers. All of that is included in the membership program. If you want to learn more about the membership program, I'll leave a link in the description below. Everyone starts out with a week-long trial for free, so you can see if the program is right for you. If you want to just dabble a little bit, take a look at 3 of our course videos and ebooks for free. I'll also leave a link in the description below for that as well. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into black watercolor paper. Now, I'm a huge fan of Stonehenge paper, and when Legion Papers reached out and said they wanted to send me a pack of their black watercolor paper, I definitely did not turn them down. So here is the pad of black watercolor paper. It feels and looks like traditional cold press watercolor paper, except of course it is black. Now let's go ahead and start with some traditional watercolor paints on this surface and see what happens. I'm going to start with a fairly bold application of this yellow-green. Now you can see when I apply it to the surface, it's barely visible. Let's try a lighter color. So we'll try this yellow, again a bold application. Now it's quite a bit more visible because it is a lighter tint, but it's still relatively dark. Let's try a red. We can see here that the red is also barely visible. So what's the deal? Well, the problem is not with the paper, instead it's with the form of watercolor that we're applying. Instead of applying traditional watercolor to this paper, we need to consider applying gouache. Gouache is also referred to as opaque watercolor. Now, this paint can behave like traditional watercolors when it's thinned down, but it also has the ability to be applied in an opaque manner. This allows us to mix colors with white, creating light values or tints, but we also have the benefit of using it like traditional watercolor. So gouache is a perfect medium for black watercolor paper. And since gouache is still watercolor, it counts. Now let's go ahead and create a painting from start to finish on black watercolor paper. We'll of course use gouache instead of traditional watercolors. I'll start here with a light sketch using an HB graphite pencil. I'll take my time and pay attention to the shapes that I see. Now it might be helpful to mark out areas where you see areas of contrast, so where you see edges of shadows and so on. Whatever works for you. You may even create a drawing that's more simple than the one that I've created here. You can see I'm sketching relatively loosely, using multiple lines to dictate the overall contour. Here you can see I'm adding some of those lines of contrast that I mentioned. Once we're happy with our pencil sketch, we can move on to applying the gouache to the surface. On my palette, I'm going to apply primary colors, yellow, blue, and red, a bit of white, and there's also a bit of black on my palette here, just not visible on the screen. I'm going to start here by mixing a light purple. In my painting, I'm going to try to bring out a little bit more color. So I'm going to push some of the shadows a little bit more towards purple, and I'm going to push some of the highlights a little bit more towards yellow. So we have contrasting color and not just value. Initially, I'm just going to fill in the overall large shapes, allowing for some variety in my mixture. So each time I go back to the palette and I need to mix up that purple again, I'm allowing some variety. So in some areas, it's a little bit more of a blue purple. In some areas, it's a little bit more of a red purple. And some of the values are a little bit different as well. This painting is going to go through multiple layered applications, so that'll give us the opportunity to develop the values and some of the colors as we add additional layers on top. You can see that the paint is fairly opaque as I'm making these initial applications. This, of course, is one of the benefits to working with gouache. Now that we have our shapes for the petals established, let's go ahead and mix up a green and apply this color to the stem. Here, a bit of yellow and a bit of our blue is mixed together, and to make it a little bit lighter, we'll add just a touch of white. Here again, we just want to fill in the shape of color initially, and later in the process, we'll adjust the values. Value is the darkness or lightness of color. It's one of the 7 elements of art. In my opinion, it's the most important element of art. And in this type of painting, with this particular medium, we can first establish the shapes of color, the overall shape of the section of the painting, and then adjust values as we go through the process. Now, just underneath the lower petal, there is an area that's somewhat of a muted purple, so we'll mix up a little bit of red and blue and add just a touch of black to it to mute it down just a bit, and we'll go ahead and fill in this shape as well. Now we'll add some indications of some shadow. And then we'll go ahead and fill in the remaining shapes. Now that we have our basic shapes established, we can start pushing the value range. So we're going to start adding some of the shadows and the highlights, broadening the contrast within the painting. We're going to do this gradually. Just as we did with the shapes of the petals where we were paying attention to the overall shape, we're going to do the same thing now with different values. We're just going to pay attention to the shapes of dark and light values that we see and paint these within the overall larger shapes, progressively working our way down to the smaller shapes and during the process, of course, increasing the contrast. So you can see for each section, I'm adding slightly lighter values and slightly darker values, allowing for variety in my mixture each time I revisit the palette. So some of the shadows might feel a little bit cooler, a little bit more blue, and some of the shadows might feel a little bit warmer, a little bit closer to purple. We'll also have areas where some of the shadows that we create feel a little bit more neutral as well. Just keep in mind that with gouache, we can go back over the top of applications and alter the color. We can also go over the top of areas and apply a completely opaque application. This is definitely an advantage over traditional watercolors. Here you can see I'm pulling in a little bit more purple on this particular petal. And as we work back up to the top of the picture plane, as we're adding some of these middle to dark values, a little bit more purple is added here as well. We'll continue patiently working our way throughout the flower, adding shapes of color and value as we see them. And keep in mind that they don't have to be an exact replica of what you're seeing in the reference. We just want a generalized idea. Now, I mentioned taking your time and being patient. This is incredibly important. Just relax and take your time and allow the painting to develop. I think too many beginning artists expect instant results and don't really work a painting to its full potential. Now, of course, you can overwork a painting, obviously, but in most cases, many people just need to spend a little bit more time and be a little bit more patient with their applications. Don't feel like you have to put down the perfect mark or the perfect shape of color and value each time you apply the brush to the surface. Keep in mind that you can alter and continue to adjust throughout the process. Now, you can see at this point, I've established some of the medium dark values. I'm going back and adding some of the lighter values. We'll continue this process of increasing the contrast each time we pass over the flower. So after my initial applications of the shadows, I've started back in the upper left-hand corner, and now I'm pushing the contrast and the value relationships. Now, the light in this scene, of course, is important, as it is in any drawing or painting that you create. And in this particular case, we have a dominant light source originating from the right side. This means that our highlights are going to exist primarily on the right side of each one of the petals, and our shadows are going to exist primarily on the opposite side of that. As we continue to push these value relationships, gradually our flower will begin to take on the illusion of having form. Now you can see I'm bringing in a little bit more of that yellow for the highlighted sections of the flower. This is going to contrast nicely with the purple shadows, since yellow and purple are opposite from each other on the color wheel. These are called complementary colors. Now, one trick with gouache is after you apply some of the color, you can load your brush up with just a bit of water and pull the color around. Doing this will reactivate some of the colors underneath and allow you to blend and make smooth transitions of color and value. I'm also paying attention to the areas where the tints are their strongest. We can call these hot zones. And I'm making sure that these areas have the most concentrated applications of white. There's still a bit of color in here. We want to avoid pure white applications, but these are the areas where we're going to see the lightest values. Now it's back to our palette, and let's go ahead and add the yellow parts of the flower here. We'll add a bit of shadow underneath. And then for some variety, we'll add some darker values as well. Now it's back to the upper left-hand corner of the painting, again pushing the contrast and value range. This time we'll go a bit darker with some of our shadows. Here again, I'm just paying attention to the smaller shapes of darker value that I see in the reference. And I'm increasing the contrast a little bit more than what's observed in the reference, so my painting is a little bit more dramatic. And remember, once you make your initial marks, you can always go back with a touch of water loaded up in the brush to create some blending. As we have before, we'll work our way from the top to the bottom left-hand corner, or I should say the bottom right-hand corner. Let's make some of the highlights a bit stronger here. Again, this is a light version of a color. It does have a touch of yellow in it, although it may appear as though it is pure white on the screen. Now let's add some shadow to the stem. Again, I've just mixed up a darker version of our green, yellow, and blue, plus just a touch of black to create a darker value. And then on the top portion of the stem where it meets the petal, we'll add a bit of white to make a lighter version. Here again, the process is the same. We're just paying attention to the shapes of color and value that we see in the reference, and then putting that information on our painting surface. We'll go a bit darker still. And then we'll add a muted green underneath this petal where it meets the stem. Some darker greens are applied to the bottom portion of the stem as well. And then we'll work our way down to the bottom part of the stem. There's another piece of the flower sticking up here, and we can see that the light source is really strong here on the right side, and the shadow is equally as strong on the left side. So, of course, we'll add lighter yellow greens on the right side, and cooler greens on the left side that are much darker. Now, that little bit at the bottom of the stem where we see a little bit more of that purple, we'll add highlights and shadows here, and we'll just continue to work these back and forth until we're happy with the value relationships. You might notice that I'm pushing this area a little bit more towards purple instead of more muted, like what we see in the reference. This, of course, is in tune with our color relationships that we're trying to pull out in this particular painting. And then when we're happy with our value relationships here, we can allow the gouache painting to dry completely before going back over the top of the kneaded eraser. This removes any remaining graphite lines that might still be visible. And now our painting on black watercolor paper is complete. Thanks again for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you were able to pick up a couple of things here and there. Remember, if you haven't done so yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos like this one. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I wish you all the very best in your artistic success.